Life is full of joys and sorrows, triumphs and tragedies. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does suffering touch our lives, often without warning? Throughout history, people have turned to religion, philosophy, and personal reflection to make sense of suffering. Some find solace in the belief that trials are tests of faith, refining our spirits like gold in a furnace. Others see suffering as a catalyst for growth, pushing us beyond our comfort zones and revealing our true strength. One such story is the story of Job, a tale of faith tested, resilience forged, and the enduring power of hope. In the heart of ancient Uz lived a man named Job. He was a man of immense wealth, his flocks numbering in the thousands, his land stretching as far as the eye could see. Job was more than just wealthy, he was a man of unwavering integrity. The Bible describes him as blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. He clung to his faith in God not out of a desire for reward, but out of a deep reverence for the divine. Little did he know that his faith was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. The story of Job is a timeless narrative that continues to resonate with readers across centuries and cultures. It grapples with the universal questions of suffering, faith, and the nature of God. In the chapters that follow, we will delve into the depths of Job's story, exploring the trials he faced, the anguish he endured, and the unwavering faith that sustained him. We will witness the unraveling of his life, the loss of his possessions, his family, and even his own health. But most importantly, we will witness the unwavering spirit of a man who refused to curse God, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. His journey is a beacon of hope, reminding us that even in the darkest of nights, dawn will eventually break. Picture, if you will, the ancient land of Uz, a land of stark beauty where rolling hills give way to vast sun-drenched plains. Here, beneath a sky that blazes with an intensity unknown in gentler climes, lived a man named Job. Job's world was a world of shepherds and flocks, of tents pitched beneath the stars, and the comforting rhythm of daily life dictated by the seasons. And in this world, Job was a man of great substance. For Job, you see, was a man who feared God. Job's household was a testament to his prosperity. His tents, woven from the finest goat hair, were spacious and airy, adorned with carpets dyed in vibrant hues. But the true heart of Job's household lay not in its material comfort, but in the joyous laughter of his children. 7 sons and 3 daughters filled his days with light and love. He instilled in them his own strong moral compass, teaching them the importance of honesty, integrity, and above all else, the fear of God. And so he poured his heart and soul into nurturing his family, creating a haven of love and laughter. Now, when we speak of Job's fear of God, it was not a fear born of terror or dread. Job's was a fear rooted in profound reverence, in an awe-inspiring awareness of the Almighty's power and majesty. Job's days began and ended with prayer, his voice a low murmur as he poured out his heart to the God who watched over him. He meticulously followed the dictates of his faith, offering sacrifices as prescribed by ancient tradition. Job's life was a living testament to the power of faith, a shining example of what it meant to walk with God. Little did Job know that his faith was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. High above the sun-scorched plains of Uz, a different kind of drama was unfolding. In a realm of ethereal light and celestial splendor, the court of heaven was in session. Angels, their faces aglow with divine radiance, gathered before the throne of the Almighty. And yet, on this day, a shadow seemed to have fallen over the heavenly court, for on this day, Satan, the accuser, stood before the throne of God. The stage was set for a cosmic drama, a wager of unimaginable stakes, with the fate of a righteous man hanging in the balance. The voice of Satan, smooth as silk yet laced with a subtle venom, cut through the silence of the heavenly court. "Have you considered your servant Job?" he asked, his tone dripping with mock innocence. "There is none like him on earth, so blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "But," Satan continued, "does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has?" The implied accusation hung heavy in the air. Was Job's piety merely a product of his prosperity? Would his faith endure if stripped of the blessings that surrounded him? The Lord God, his gaze unwavering, met the challenge in Satan's eyes. He knew the heart of Job, knew the depth of his faith, the purity of his intentions. "Very well," the Lord replied, "everything that he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." The challenge had been issued, the wager accepted. The fate of Job now rested on the outcome of this cosmic test. And so, with a final chilling smile, Satan departed the heavenly court, his mind already awhirl with plans of destruction and despair. The first blow came swiftly, a devastating whirlwind of violence that left Job reeling in shock and disbelief. Raiders descended upon his flocks, leaving a trail of carnage and chaos in their wake. Thousands of sheep lay slaughtered, their fleece stained crimson with blood. Servants stumbled into Job's presence, their words tumbling over each other in a torrent of fear and despair. "The Sabaeans attacked," they cried. "They have stolen the oxen and donkeys and put the servants to the sword." Job, his heart pounding in his chest, could scarcely comprehend the magnitude of the disaster that had befallen him. As if the loss of his worldly possessions and the massacre of his servants were not enough, a new wave of suffering now crashed upon Job. It began with an itch, a maddening tingling beneath his skin. Then came the burning, a searing pain that spread like wildfire. Boils, angry and red, erupted across his skin, oozing a foul-smelling pus. Job, once a picture of robust health, was now a mass of sores, his flesh raw and weeping. Yet, through it all, Job refused to curse God, clinging to the belief that God had a purpose for his suffering. Job's wife, her own heart shattered by the loss of their children and the seemingly endless torment her husband now endured, could bear it no longer. She had watched as he had borne the loss of his worldly possessions with stoic resignation, his faith in God an unyielding shield against despair. But now, as she witnessed the physical agony that racked his body, a different kind of despair, a despair born of helplessness and compassion, threatened to consume her. "Do you still persist in your integrity?" she cried out, her voice hoarse with unshed tears, her words a mixture of anguish and accusation. "Curse God and die! What good is your righteousness if it only brings you suffering?" Her words, though harsh, were spoken out of love, out of a mother's broken heart that yearned to see an end to her husband's torment. She could not fathom a God who would inflict such pain on a man as righteous as Job, and in her despair, she saw only one way out, a final act of defiance against a seemingly cruel and indifferent deity. But Job, even in the depths of his agony, recognized the temptation in his wife's words, the seductive whisper of despair that threatened to extinguish the last flickering embers of his faith. He knew that to curse God even in his pain would be to surrender to the darkness, to betray the very core of his being. "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks," Job replied, his voice a raspy whisper, his words measured and deliberate despite the pain that coursed through him. "Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" His words, though spoken in weakness, carried the weight of conviction, the unwavering belief that even in the midst of suffering, God's purpose remained steadfast, his love unyielding. Job knew that his faith was being tested, stretched to its very limits, but he refused to let go, to allow doubt and despair to poison his soul. He had lost everything that he held dear. His body was racked with pain, yet still, he clung to the belief that God was with him, even in the darkness. He had no answers, no explanations for the suffering that had befallen him, but he refused to allow his pain to define his relationship with the divine. Job's faith, like a mighty oak rooted deep in the earth, weathered the storm of his affliction. His spirit, though battered and bruised, remained unbroken, a testament to the enduring power of faith in the face of unimaginable adversity. Job's physical pain was excruciating, a constant torment that gnawed at his flesh and clouded his mind. Yet there was another kind of pain, a deeper, more profound anguish that settled over him like a suffocating shroud. It was the pain of isolation, the agony of feeling utterly alone in his suffering. He had lost his wealth, his children, his servants, and even his health. But the loss that cut deepest was the loss of understanding, the inability to comprehend why such suffering had been visited upon him. His friends, once a source of comfort and counsel, now seemed distant, their words hollow and unhelpful in the face of his anguish. He looked up at the vastness of the night sky, the stars twinkling down at him with an indifference that mirrored his own sense of isolation. Was he but a plaything of the gods? A pawn in some cosmic game of chance? Did his suffering have any meaning? Any purpose at all? The weight of these questions pressed down upon him, threatening to crush his spirit. The universe, once a source of wonder and awe, now seemed cold and uncaring, a vast and indifferent void in which his pain echoed endlessly. Yet, even in the depths of his despair, a faint glimmer of hope remained, a stubborn refusal to surrender to the darkness that threatened to engulf him. News of Job's calamities spread like wildfire across the plains of Uz, carried on the desert winds to the far corners of his world. Word reached his friends, men who had shared his table, who had laughed with him in times of prosperity, who had marveled at his unwavering faith and impeccable integrity. And these friends, their hearts heavy with concern, resolved to travel to Job's side, to offer whatever comfort they could in his hour of need. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, their names echoing the ancient wisdom of their respective tribes, set out on their journey. They had known Job for many years, had witnessed his piety, his generosity, his unwavering devotion to God. Surely, they reasoned, there must be some explanation for the unimaginable suffering that had befallen their friend. They envisioned finding Job broken but not defeated, his spirit bowed but not broken. They imagined offering words of solace, reminding him of God's love and faithfulness, and helping him to make sense of the seemingly senseless tragedies that had befallen him. Little did they know that their journey would lead them not to a place of comfort and consolation, but to a maelstrom of anguish, accusation, and spiritual wrestling that would challenge their own deeply held beliefs. As they approached Job's homestead, once a bustling hub of activity, they were greeted by an eerie silence broken only by the mournful bleating of a lone sheep that had somehow escaped the carnage. Gone were the flocks that once blanketed the hillsides. Gone were the servants who had scurried to and fro, tending to Job's every need. In their place stood a solitary figure, his body covered in sores, his head shaved in mourning, his eyes filled with a pain that seemed to pierce the very heavens. The sight of Job, once a picture of health and prosperity, now reduced to a shadow of his former self, sent a chill through the hearts of his friends. They had prepared themselves for grief, for despair, but nothing could have prepared them for the raw, visceral agony that emanated from their friend. Overcome with emotion, they tore their robes, sprinkled dust on their heads, and wept aloud, their cries mingling with the mournful sigh of the desert wind. For 7 days and 7 nights they sat with Job in silence, their presence a testament to the enduring bonds of friendship, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. They had come to comfort, to console, but as they listened to Job's anguished cries, as they witnessed the depth of his pain, their own hearts began to harden, their minds searching for an explanation, a justification for such unmerited suffering. And so, the silence that had shrouded their gathering was broken, not by words of comfort, but by a chorus of accusation. Eliphaz, the eldest and most respected of the group, spoke first, his voice a blend of concern and subtle condemnation. "Remember, Job," he intoned, "who ever perished being innocent? Or where were the upright ever cut off? As I've seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same." His words, though veiled in the language of piety, struck a discordant note. Was he implying that Job's suffering was a direct result of his own sinfulness? Bildad, his voice sharp and unforgiving, echoed Eliphaz's sentiments. "How long will you say these things and the words of your mouth be like a strong wind?" he challenged. "Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right?" Zophar, the youngest and most impetuous of the three, did not mince words. "Your iniquities have taken hold of you," he declared, his voice laced with judgment. "Your sins have withheld good from you. You have hidden iniquity in your heart. You have cherished deceit within you." Job listened to his friend's accusations, their words like salt rubbed into his already festering wounds. He had expected comfort, solace, understanding, but instead, he was met with judgment, condemnation, and the implicit assumption that his suffering was a direct consequence of his own hidden sins. The agony of his physical afflictions paled in comparison to the searing pain of being misunderstood, of being accused of crimes he did not commit. "How long will you torment me and crush me with words?" Job cried out, his voice hoarse with anguish, his body racked with sobs. "These 10 times you have reproached me. You are not ashamed that you make yourselves strange to me. Have pity on me, have pity on me, O you my friends, for the hand of God has touched me." He tried to explain his innocence, to defend his integrity, but his words fell on deaf ears. His friends, blinded by their own theological certainty, refused to see the possibility that suffering could exist outside the neat confines of their understanding of divine justice. They had constructed a world where righteousness was always rewarded and wickedness always punished, and in their eyes, Job's suffering could only be explained by his own hidden transgressions. The tragedy of Job's situation was compounded by the fact that he could not understand his own suffering. He had searched his heart, had examined his life, and could find no sin worthy of such punishment. And yet there he was, stripped of everything he held dear, his body a mass of sores, his spirit crushed by the weight of his friends' accusations. In the face of his friends' unrelenting judgment and his own inability to comprehend the depths of his suffering, Job turned to the only source of hope that remained: God himself. He knew that his friends' accusations, however hurtful, were rooted in their own limited understanding of the divine. He recognized that their insistence on linking his suffering to his own sinfulness, while misguided, stemmed from their desire to make sense of a world that often seemed chaotic and unjust. And so, with a heart filled with both anguish and a stubborn flicker of faith, Job raised his voice to the heavens, his words a mixture of lament, accusation, and a desperate yearning for understanding. "Oh, that my words were written," he cried out, his voice echoing across the desolate landscape. "Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with an iron pen and lead they were engraved in the rock forever." He knew that his friends could not provide the answers he sought, that only God, in his infinite wisdom and power, could unravel the mystery of his suffering. And so, Job dared to question, to challenge, to demand an audience with the Almighty. He railed against the injustice of the situation, the seeming randomness of his afflictions, the unbearable weight of his friends' accusations. Yet, even in his anger, his despair, his desperate plea for justice, there remained a glimmer of hope, a stubborn refusal to let go of the belief that God was still present, still listening, still capable of redeeming even the most profound suffering. Job's faith, though stretched to its very limits, had not yet broken. He would continue to cry out, to question, to demand answers until the heavens themselves were moved to respond. For what seemed like an eternity, silence hung heavy over the desolate landscape. Job's anguished cries, his pleas for understanding, his desperate demands for justice, seemed to dissipate into the vast emptiness of the desert, swallowed by the very heavens to which they were addressed. His friends, their words of accusation spent, their theological pronouncements rendered hollow in the face of such profound suffering, sat in stunned silence, their gazes fixed on the tormented figure of their friend. The sun, a fiery orb in the cloudless sky, beat down upon them with an intensity that mirrored the inner turmoil that raged within their hearts. The air, thick and heavy with the stench of Job's affliction, and the unspoken tension that hung between them, seemed to crackle with anticipation. Even the wind, that restless wanderer of the plains, seemed to hold its breath, waiting, listening for some sign, some indication that Job's cries had been heard, that his pleas had not gone unanswered. And then, just when it seemed as if the silence would swallow them whole, a faint tremor ran through the earth, a subtle vibration that sent a shiver of anticipation through those who felt it. The air, moments ago stifling and oppressive, seemed to stir, to awaken as if from a deep slumber. A distant rumble, like the sound of thunder approaching from beyond the horizon, rolled across the plains, growing louder, more insistent with each passing moment. Job, his body racked with pain, his eyes glazed with a mixture of exhaustion and a flicker of desperate hope, slowly raised his head, his gaze drawn to the eastern sky where the horizon shimmered and danced in the heat. His friends, their faces a mixture of apprehension and a strange sense of awe, followed his gaze, their hearts pounding in their chests, their minds struggling to comprehend the significance of the unfolding spectacle. The rumble intensified, morphing into a deafening roar as a whirlwind of awesome power descended from the heavens, its swirling vortex, a terrifying spectacle of dust and debris that blotted out the sun and cast an eerie pall over the land. The very earth seemed to tremble beneath its fury, the ground shaking as if in the grip of some primordial force. Job and his friends, huddled together in terror, shielded their eyes from the blinding dust, their ears ringing with the deafening roar that seemed to consume their world. And then from the very heart of the whirlwind, a voice boomed forth, a voice that resonated with power and authority, a voice that spoke not of comfort or consolation, but of cosmic majesty and unfathomable wisdom. It was the voice of God, the creator of heaven and earth, the architect of the universe, the one whose ways were higher than their ways, whose thoughts were beyond human comprehension. "Who is this?" The voice thundered, its words echoing through the whirlwind, shaking the very foundations of their being. "Who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man, I will question you, and you shall answer me." Job, his body trembling, his mind reeling from the sheer power of the divine presence, prostrated himself before the whirlwind, his words catching in his throat. His friends, their faces pale with terror, their carefully constructed theological arguments crumbling to dust in the face of this awesome display of divine power, could only cower in fear and silence. "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?" The voice continued its questions, coming in a torrent, each one a hammer blow against their limited human understanding. "Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk, or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Job, his mind overwhelmed, could only shake his head in mute acknowledgement of his own insignificance. The God who spoke from the whirlwind was not the God of his limited human understanding, the God of neatly packaged theological explanations. This was the God of creation, the God of power and majesty, the God whose wisdom encompassed the universe and beyond. "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades?" The voice challenged, its words echoing the rhythm of creation itself. "Or loosen the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead Ursa Major with its cubs? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on the earth?" With each question, Job felt his own understanding shrink, his own self-importance dwindle to nothingness. He had demanded answers, had cried out for justice, but now, confronted with the awesome reality of the divine, he saw the folly of his demands, the audacity of his pleas. For how could a mere mortal, a creature of dust and breath, presume to question the ways of the Almighty, the one who held the universe in the palm of his hand? The whirlwind subsided, the voice of God fading into the stillness that followed, leaving Job and his companions in a silence even more profound than before. The dust settled, revealing a landscape bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, the sky ablaze with hues of orange, purple, and gold, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had just transpired. Yet for Job, the world would never be the same. He had looked into the face of the divine, had heard the voice of the Almighty, and had been humbled, his own understanding shattered like pottery dashed against a rock. Gone was the righteous anger, the indignant demands for justice, the desperate pleas for explanation. In their place blossomed a newfound humility, a profound awareness of his own finitude in the face of the infinite. Job, once so certain of his own righteousness, now saw himself as he truly was, a creature of dust and breath, utterly dependent on the grace of the one who had spoken from the whirlwind. "I know that you can do all things," Job whispered, his voice barely audible above the gentle sigh of the desert wind, "and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know." He had sought answers, had demanded explanations, but now he realized that true wisdom lay not in possessing all the answers, but in recognizing the limitations of his own understanding. The God who had created the universe, who had set the stars in their courses, who had breathed life into all creation, was not obligated to explain his ways to mere mortals, and yet, in his infinite mercy, he had revealed himself to Job, not through a litany of answers, but through a whirlwind of questions, each one a testament to his power, his majesty, and his unfathomable wisdom. The story of Job does not end with a neatly packaged explanation, a theological treatise on the nature of suffering or the intricacies of divine justice. It ends as it began, with a man of faith, but a faith transformed, refined through the crucible of suffering, stripped bare of its self-righteousness and humbled before the majesty of the divine. Job, stripped of his possessions, his children, his health, emerged from the whirlwind not with answers but with a deeper understanding of the God he served. He had learned that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to believe even when we cannot understand. It is the unwavering conviction that even in the darkest of nights, even when our world seems to be crumbling around us, God is present, His love unwavering, His purposes unfolding according to His perfect plan. Job's story is a reminder that suffering is an inevitable part of the human experience. It touches us all regardless of our righteousness or our sinfulness. It is a test, a trial, a crucible in which our faith is refined, our character tested, our spirit strengthened. But it is not the end of the story. For even in the midst of suffering, even in the depths of our despair, there is hope. There is the hope of a God who walks with us through the valley of the shadow of death, who collects our tears in His bottle, who numbers the hairs on our heads. There is the hope of a love that surpasses all understanding, a love that pursues us relentlessly, even when we run and hide. And there is the hope of a future where suffering will be no more, where tears will be wiped away, and where we will finally see face to face the one who has sustained us through our darkest hour.